All right, so welcome to the Virginia Cyber Range Weekly Workshop. This is David Raymond, the director here at the Virginia Cyber Range, and this week we're going to talk about we're going to do an introduction to capture the flag exercises. Talk about what they are, how to get involved. We'll point out some different CTFs that students can play right now to get some practice, and there's even a way on one CTF site to set up a classroom so that you can monitor your students' progress in the CTF. So there's some resources out there that I'm going to point you to, and today will be just an introduction. Next week and for the next several weeks, we'll do some hands-on CTF challenges. So what I'll do is, this week I'll introduce the different types of challenges, and in the subsequent weeks, I'm going to grab a challenge type each week. Maybe some challenge types will span weeks, but I will grab a challenge type each week, and then we will do it together, right? So I'll show you some tools for how to solve some of the problems. I'll let you hack on it for a little bit, and then I'll show you how I solved it. And lots of these CTF challenges you'll see can be solved in multiple different ways. So they're a cool way to get students involved in cybersecurity. I mean, the students who get into CTFs are generally the ones that sort of go a long way in the cybersecurity field. And I'm a big fan of CTFs for teaching students. First, before we dive into that, let's see if I can get my slides to work. There we go. Here's same commercial every week, right? Weekly workshop coverage of cybersecurity topics. Every week, Tuesdays at 1 p.m., recorded and shared. So you can find all of these weekly workshops on our Virginia Cyber Range webpage at virginiacyberrange.org. If you go to the community tab or the community button on the right side, then you click on weekly workshops, and we have I don't know how many are up there now, 20-ish, maybe not quite 20, but we started this middle of the fall term, so there are quite a few of these out there, and some of them cover things like basic introduction to the Virginia Cyber Range and using the range, and then how to use it in the classroom, etc. So lots of different topics are covered. If you have any specific topics that you want to see covered, then please do send an email. You can send an email to me, or you can send an email to contact@virginiacyberrange.org, and we'll add your topic to the list of topics for future workshops. So I usually start these with a little bit of news, so I'll do this, try to do this quickly. I'm a bit of an InfoSec news junkie, so this gives me an excuse to read the InfoSec news every day. So here's a couple stories about social media. First one, 83% of consumers believe personalized ads are morally wrong. And this is a survey done by RSA Security, surveying about 6,000 consumers in Europe and America. So 83% believe personalized ads are morally wrong, right? What's a personalized ad? Well, I'm sure you've seen these on your social media feed, or just when you surf the web. Sorry, I'm getting pop-ups here. See if I can turn that off. And those personalized ads are based on your previous Google searches, for example. And so companies like Facebook and Google can collect a whole bunch of information about your browsing habits, and then they use that information to serve ads to you. And particularly if you search for particular things in Google, for example, then you'll see ads related to those things showing up, and it's sort of the business of the internet these days. 83% of consumers believe that is morally wrong. That kind of was surprising to me, because what you would think is that people would if they know that Facebook is mining their data to serve ads, then you'd presume that they might stop using Facebook, but that doesn't seem to be the case, at least not in large numbers. So I guess it's people see the benefit outweighing the moral quandary of allowing Facebook to mine information about them to get to serve them ads and etc. Second story here: Twitter still can't keep up with its flood of junk accounts. So this one sort of surprised me as well. So surely folks are aware of serious allegations of social media feeds misused during the 2016 election cycle to try to influence the vote, right? And how is that done? Well, you have Twitter feeds that were targeted at specific demographics, trying to convince those demographics of things that maybe weren't true, or they tried to, sort of try to feed people's preconceived notions of things and try to get people to vote a certain way. And a lot of that was done through Facebook and Twitter using fake accounts, and both of those social media sites, and probably all social media sites, they include the ability for to automate usage, right? And so by automate usage, that is you have an account, and the way most people use these social media sites is they actually type messages and they click like and they retweet or whatever. But you can automate all that using the what's called an API, which is an application programmer's interface. And so if you have a Twitter account, you can apply for a developer account. And with a developer account, you can automate Twitter activity by calling these different APIs, and you have to have a developer account in order to do that. But by calling those APIs, you can tweet anything, you can retweet things, you can like things, you can mine the Twitterverse for information like specific hashtags, specific people, and then you can retweet what they say, and you can also, by mining that information, you can understand people's political proclivities, right? So if a certain person retweets President Trump over and over, for example, with some positive comments related to his tweets, then you might assume that person is a Republican with certain viewpoint. If they're retweeting I don't know, Elizabeth Warren or MSNBC, then you could probably assume that, again, with some sort of positive messaging, you could probably assume that they're sort of have left leanings, Democratic leanings. And so by doing that, you can essentially write a program that finds people that sort of see things a certain way, and then you can target them with specific messaging, and then you can potentially get them to vote a certain way. And that's certainly what has been alleged had happened in the 2016 cycle. And after that, these social media companies really clamped down on this whole thing. Like, so before the 2016 elections, Twitter, you didn't need a developer account to access their APIs. Literally anybody could create a fake account. You could even automate the creation of accounts, right? So you can spin out these bogus personas, a name and a picture, and create an account using Twitter APIs, and then use that account to do things, and essentially nobody has to touch anything. It's all automated. So so nowadays you can't do that anymore, right? You have to have a Twitter account, and then you have to apply for a developer's account using that existing Twitter account, and that developer's account will, if it gets approved, will give you access to the API. And they don't just give it to anybody, right? So actually, I have a developer's account request that's outstanding. So I requested it a couple of months ago. They and when you request a developer's account, you have to give a very specific use case, right? I'm going to use it to do this, and then they vet those requests, and and then eventually it may or may not get approved. You know, they may just deny it if they think you're being deceitful. And then what they say they do is they say that they monitor your usage of that developer account and make sure that you're following the use case that you outlined in your application. And if you're not, they'll kill the developer's access. So it's pretty difficult to get a developer's account these days. I don't know what they did with all the people that had access to the API before. I don't know if they just sort of, you know, cut all those people off and made them reapply for developers accounts. Really don't know, but so this story was a 16-month study conducted, you know, recently, so ended recently, looking at 1.5 billion tweets, and this was done by security researchers, right? So this was people at a college. I don't remember what the school was, but if you go to this website, or if you go to this story on wired.com, you can get more information about it. But what they found was 167,000, so 167,000 apps. So each one of these apps has to be tied to a developer's account. 167,000 apps using the Twitter API to automate bot accounts. So a bot account is one of these accounts that isn't a person interacting with it. It's a program. So these accounts are spreading spam, malware, and fake news. So that's a lot. Again, I was pretty surprised by that large number. And what these researchers found was that generally these accounts, they got caught after about 100 tweets, and then on average, roughly 100 tweets, they would get sort of discovered as being bots or not following their agreed upon use case for access to the Twitter API, and then they would get kicked off. So I don't know, surprising to me. I thought that I sort of made this assumption that the social media companies would do a better job of cleaning up this sort of activity. Apparently they haven't quite gotten there yet. And this is just Twitter. Of course, Twitter has, if you read this article, there's a little bit more context than this, right? Twitter sort of comes back and says, well, this study is flawed in the following ways, but it doesn't really give any competing sort of number of bogus access to the API. So sort of an interesting story. More news. If you tuned in last week, I talked about Sprint using 5GE in its marketing, right? So right now, we're in the midst of the fourth generation of cellular access. So if most people have 4G cellular, and the specific type of 4G cellular that people use these days is this thing called LTE, which stands for long-term evolution, I believe. So that's what you see in the corner of your smartphone. Like over here, there's this. You know, here's an AT&T phone, and it says 5GE in the corner. And so Sprint is suing AT&T over this 5GE branding. And so last week, I just mentioned the fact that AT&T was starting to use 5GE in their marketing, and you could get you know, your phone in certain markets would say 5GE like this one does, and it's not really 5G, right? So that there's a little E there. It's not really 5G service. What is 5G service? Well, 5G is the next, you know, sort of the natural evolution of cellular technology. Right now we use 4G, which has certain bandwidth and latency requirements. In order to call yourself 4G, you have to meet these requirements. And that is not a law, that's an agreement between cellular carriers, right? So in order to call yourself 5G, there's sort of the same idea. You have to have these certain bandwidth and latency of the network itself, and there's very specific products that are intended to support 5G, and you know, Sprint says AT&T doesn't use any of those products. They say that AT&T is simply rebranding 4G to get people to buy it, to buy their 4G network by calling it 5G. So from Sprint's perspective, this is purely false advertising. And you know, AT&T's defense is twofold. They say, first of all, we have this really good 4G network that's really twice as fast as other people's 4G networks. So we're going to call it, we're not calling it 5G, we're calling it an evolutionary step towards 5G, so we call it 5GE. you know, it sounds a little shady. Again, it's not a law. There's no law that says you can't advertise things in a certain way, at least not with regard to 4G and 5G. But basically, Sprint is suing AT&T and saying this is false advertising. The speed of their network is not what people would consider 5G. It's really just rebranded 4G. And a survey of AT&T customers said that over half of them thought that 5G was better than 5G, or 5GE was better than 5G. So basically, these people thought that, well, this 5G must be super 5G. So I'm getting something better than what Verizon or Sprint is going to have when they release their 5G network. And then 43% thought they could purchase a 5G AT&T smartphone now, which they can't. There's no true 5G AT&T network available anywhere. There is a Verizon 5G network available in a couple of cities, a couple of neighborhoods in a couple of cities as sort of a test bed. I don't know if Sprint has any 5G deployed or not, but I mean, right now you can't go to your local, unless you live in a very specific part of the U.S., you can't go to your local AT&T store and buy a 5G phone. It's, you know, it's a particular radio in the device, and et cetera. So anyway, lawsuits over 5G. And so this whole 5G thing, again, this is the continued evolution of cellular technology. You know, exactly how that works is not going to be, you know, 5G will roll out over the next 10 or 12 years. So, you know, so 5 years from now, there'll be a standard 5G that people will sort of glom onto. For 4G, that's LTE. In the early days of 4G, there was this competition between LTE and a competing technology called WiMAX. And LTE sort of won that battle. If you think of it sort of like the Betamax versus VHS, you know, very similar technologies, but for marketing reasons, VHS ended up sort of winning that battle. So same kind of a thing. LTE ended up winning. WiMAX isn't 4G anymore. 5G will see the same thing, I'm sure, but it won't be. That'll play out over the next several years. Okay, and then another news story. Google Play caught hosting an app that steals users' cryptocurrency. And I guess the stealing cryptocurrency isn't really this interesting news. The more interesting news is the way this thing does it. And basically, this piece of malware can copy and paste things in and out of the clipboard in the phone. And so what the app can do is, what this malicious app could do is it could use the clipboard to replace a person's wallet with the attacker's wallet address, right? So if somebody connects to this third-party Ethereum coin app, the malicious software will, you know, and they try to trade Ethereum coin, the malicious software will replace the wallet that they're telling the system to put money in with the attacker's wallet, and so the Ethereum coin will go to the wrong place, basically. And this use of the clipboard as a malicious technique in software on a mobile phone apparently is a new thing. So that's sort of the interesting piece of that news. All right, here's some more practical security news. This is something that I would share with in fact, I will share it with my students tomorrow when I have class. I would encourage you to share it with your students. There's a Chrome extension. It's called Google Password Checkup, and this thing checks passwords against known compromised passwords. Pretty clever idea, really. It was developed in coordination with crypto experts, is what they say, cryptography experts at Stanford University. And I would say that this would have to be developed in coordination with experts when you kind of see how this thing works. And what they say it does is it will identify if you put in credentials in a website on the Chrome browser, if those credentials if there's a known compromise of those specific credentials, then you will get notified that those credentials have been compromised and you should change your password immediately, basically, is what they say. And so here's the stated design principles. Alerts are actionable, not informational, right? So if you put in your username and then a poor password like password, this thing is not going to alert on that. unless that that specific pairing of username and password is a known compromised set of credentials. So you're not going to get these spurious, hey, that's not a very good password, think up a better one. You're only going to get notified by this thing if there's a known compromise. They say privacy is at the heart of the design. You can imagine, in order to make this work, there's a pretty significant back end, and I'll give an indication of that here in a minute. But there's a pretty significant back end where Google has this huge database of compromised credentials, and so when you type something in, some bit of information has to be passed to Google so that they can do a search to see if that credential has been compromised, and then there has to be a return to you that says, hey, change the password. And if that isn't done in a very private way, then your credentials could be erroneously shared, and that would be bad. So privacy is very important to this whole thing. And then it says advice that avoids fatigue, right? So again, only addresses known compromises. So how does this work? Here, this is from the Google webpage. Step 1, whenever Google discovers a username and password exposed by a data breach, we store and strongly hash an encrypted copy of the data, right? So anytime they know of a password dump on the dark web, for example, they'll mine that thing and they'll collect all credentials, usernames and passwords. So this isn't just Gmail addresses, this is any username password combination. They'll hash it using this Argon2 hash, and then they will keep the first couple of bytes of this, and this is just so that they can index into their database. And then they use an encryption technology called elliptic curve cryptography, using a Google key, a key that only Google knows. And they'll encrypt that bit of data, and they'll associate with that 2-byte identifier. Okay, so this is what their database looks like, right? It's this huge repository of data that's been hashed and encrypted and indexed using this 2-byte prefix. So this happens for all password credential dumps. This has nothing to do with you signing up for this service. If you're signed up for the service, and again, it's a Chrome extension, so if you go to your Chrome browser and search for extensions, look for password checkup, you'll find it. When you log into a site, Password Checkup will send a strongly hashed and encrypted copy of your username to Google. So your browser is going to do the same thing. It's going to use Argon2 hash to hash this thing, and so there's this 2-byte identifier. Then it's going to use elliptic curve cryptography using a key known to you only, or to your browser. You don't know it, but your browser knows it. And then it ships that whole thing to Google. So your credentials aren't sent to Google. A encrypted copy of a hash is sent to Google, which it's impossible. If you recall our discussion of hashes, it's impossible to turn that bit of data back into the original password and username. So that thing's sent to Google. Google can then essentially do a lookup in their database to see if that value exists in the database, and if it does, that means that your credentials must have been compromised. It might have been a different website that you had logged into, but it doesn't matter. If you use those credentials anywhere on the internet on a website that was compromised, then Google will see that those credentials were compromised, and they will, if you use those credentials on that website or anywhere else, they're going to alert you and tell you that you should change your password. So I think this is a pretty cool technique. I think it's probably very secure, and I use it. I've not been alerted on any usernames and passwords, thank goodness. Hopefully I never am, but I think this is pretty cool technology that solves an interesting problem. Okay, and I'm behind schedule, so I'm going to jump into our discussion of capture the flag competitions. So I can find my other slides. So this is a set of slides that I created for our annual, first annual Virginia Cybersecurity Education Conference. And I've refined them because I've given this talk a couple of times since then, and I'm going to give it at another conference. Well, I'm going to give it at a workshop next week, and then I'm going to give it at another conference in a couple of months. So this is a thing that I am definitely interested in. So CTF is a tool for cybersecurity education. So first of all, what is a capture the flag? Capture the flag is a cybersecurity competition These CTFs can be individual or team-based. Most of them these days are team-based. Sometimes in person, often remote. So one of the cool things about CTFs is that there's all kinds of CTFs out there that you don't have to go to a specific place at a specific time to participate in them. So some of them are just available all the time. Students can join them and play them anytime they want. I'm going to show you a couple of those in a few minutes. Some of them are time bound, right? So they start at a certain time and end at a certain time, but you don't have to go to the location of the CTF in order to play. You can play remotely. So, basically teams get together wherever they want, somebody's house or in a classroom, and they log into a web portal and they're able to access challenges in that web portal and submit their solutions. And so that feature makes it a great way for students to get involved because it's inexpensive for the school, right? They can have a CTF team. Students don't have to travel very much, and it's all accessed via a web page. So there's no special equipment or anything that you need to buy. Various different formats of CTFs. The kinds of CTFs that I'm going to talk about because I have most experience with are Jeopardy Style CTFs. There are also other kinds of CTFs, right? So there are some CTFs where you're attacking and some CTFs where you're defending. And so if you think of like Cyber Patriot, that's sort of defensive oriented CTF. Another one of these is CCDC for college students, Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition, CCDC. Those exist. I'm not really going to talk about those. I don't have a lot of experience with those. But the ones I'm going to talk about are Jeopardy style CTFs, and I'll tell you what that means here in a minute. Hosted by, so where do you find these? They're hosted by college CTF teams, right? So the Virginia Tech Cybersecurity Club holds an annual CTF. The GMU Cybersecurity Club holds an annual CTF. There are different college teams around the state that host these competitions and around the country, I should say. There are companies that host them, companies that are looking for talent, right? So if you do a little Googling for Jeopardy style capture the flag, you'll invariably find some companies that host these or that sponsor these in some way in order to find talent for their organizations. DoD and government agencies host these different things, and you can host one. If you're a Virginia educator, then I can provide you a CTF site. Or, I mean, if I give you a CTF site, then you have to sort of manage and administer it. But I'm going to point you to some CTF sites that you don't have to do any management or administration. You can just point your students there, and they can start hacking on challenges, and in some cases you can track their activity to see how they're doing. So I'll talk about some of those opportunities. Okay, so what is Jeopardy style CTF? So if you think of a Jeopardy board, and this is a Jeopardy board from a capture the flag competition, but if you think of the game show Jeopardy with old Alex Trebek, what you usually have is categories. So you'll have ancient Rome, and you'll have romance novels. I don't know, I'm just making up categories here. And then you'll have 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, right? And then same here. And so each one of these is a question, and it's worth the number of points that are shown here. And generally, the difficulty increases as the point value increases. Jeopardy style capture the flag competition is the same idea, right? You have categories. In this case, categories are trivia, recon, web, reversing, etc. And there are point values. These trivia ones, they're all worth 100. Recon, there's 3 100-point challenges, a couple 400-point challenges. So it doesn't necessarily increase, in the same way that the sort of game show Jeopardy increases. But the basic framework of a set of categories and challenges with point values based on the level of difficulty of the challenge, that's a Jeopardy style capture the flag competition. And so this example board here is from a CTF at NYU Poly up in Brooklyn, New York, from back in 2012. I just pulled this off Google Images. So that's the idea, right? And these are the kinds of categories that you might see. And so here's a sort of a high level overview of the different challenge types, and then I'm going to spend a slide quickly talking about each kind of challenge and the kinds of tools that students might use to approach those challenges. And then again, over the next several weeks, I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into some of these various challenge types and talk about, show how to use some of the tools that students might use to attack these challenges. I'm going to start. I'm not going to start with recon. I'm going to start with cryptography. So crypto challenges relate to simple ciphers or modern crypto algorithms, right? So cryptography challenge is any sort of encoding. If you might have some encoding scheme, like if you know what like a rotational cipher is, right? Like a Caesar cipher. A simple cryptography challenge might be some simple encoded message using a Caesar cipher, and the student has to sort of figure out that it's a Caesar cipher and then decrypt the message, and the decrypted message, that's the flag. Or it might be something like a broken encryption scheme, but anything related to cryptography or ciphers would fit into the cryptography bucket. Reverse engineering, generally, sometimes you see that as reversing. Sometimes you see it referred to as exploitation. Basically, these kinds of challenges have students analyze. Most of them have students analyzing an executable program to produce a flag, right? So if you have an executable program, it doesn't, it's not the program written in C or Java or JavaScript or whatever. It's like executable. And so in order to analyze that kind of a program, normally the students would have to have some sort of a understanding of assembly language programming. They'd need to be able to recognize, what's going on in the program, and this maybe there wouldn't be a lot of these directed towards high school students, but more on the college front, where students would have a little bit more experience with computer organization and assembly language programming. Web challenges: find a hidden flag in a web page or a vulnerable web application. Digital forensics: this is where you're analyzing like some sort of a hard drive image or a memory image, doing the things that a digital and forensic investigator would do, the same techniques that you might use to like trace somebody's activity in order to solve a crime. And then networking generally has a lot to do with analyzing captured network traffic, or sometimes live network traffic. But being able to analyze network traffic and see what's going on are skills that you need to be able to solve a networking challenge. And then a reconnaissance challenge, I left that for last because that's kind of a grab bag, right? If you have a challenge that doesn't fit into these other buckets, then those are often just be sort of thrown into the recon bucket of challenges, and they can be anything from a bunch of Google search, right? Like some breadcrumbs where a student's going to have to do a bunch of Google searches to get to an answer. There's just any sort of problem solving. So these might be problems that don't even necessarily look so much like a cybersecurity problem, but the idea is to sort of reinforce this whole notion of problem solving and how that's important to cybersecurity investigations. So reconnaissance is kind of a catch-all category. And those are some of the funnest challenges to create. So reconnaissance, we'll do a little bit of a dive into reconnaissance here. Generally require competitors to follow a trail of clues to reach a final flag. Okay, so search engines are going to be your friend with reconnaissance challenges, right? Google, you might get some blob of data and you don't know what the blob of data is, and so you have to pull the blob of data up in some piece of software that can let you look at it on your computer. So you might try to open it with Notepad on your Windows computer, or on your Linux box. You might just use cat to examine the file. And if it's a this is if it's a text-based file or ASCII-based. If it's not one of these things, then you're going to want to use a hex editor to examine the file. And the hex editor may give you clues. Lots of different file types, for example, have these things called magic numbers at the beginning, and that's the first few bytes of the file, inside the file. And if you look at those first few bytes, you might see that is a even though it's not named this way, it might be a JPEG image file, or it may be some other kind of a file, PDF or something. So you can, once you start unrolling this blob of data, you can use Google and other search engines to kind of figure out what the blob of data is, and that might help you out. The Internet Wayback Machine is a tool that is sometimes useful in reconnaissance challenges. If you're being asked about something that happened in the past, with regard to a certain organization, then you might be able to use the Wayback Machine to look at that organization's web pages back in those earlier days. I did created a challenge last year that involved a student who was a graduate from a institution in New York back in the mid-90s, I guess, and it was a question about his I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was a question about a student, and the information, all the information to solve that challenge was sort of easily searchable in the Internet Wayback Machine, and some people were able to discover the answer to that question. Who is lookups is helpful for some reconnaissance challenges. So if a challenge is asking you to make to find out some information about a particular organization and its network, so maybe you're asked to find the IP address range for some .com, for example, or maybe you're asked to find who is the what's the DNS server for this organization, this company, who's the network administrator, anything related to the network. A lot of that information can be found using whois lookups from places like whois.icann.org. So that's sometimes useful. Shodan is another search system that can be used to look for things on the internet that are not web pages. So Shodan is a technique that can be used to find helpful information doing a reconnaissance challenge. It's kind of hard to talk a lot about reconnaissance challenges because, again, it's total grab bag, right? So the students are going to be given some question or some thing, and they're going to have to do some analysis and start answering questions. And I would say that the biggest resource students are going to have to approach those kinds of challenges are web search engines. Sometimes the challenge is just figuring out what the challenge is asking you in a reconnaissance challenge. So again, from a challenge creator standpoint, those are often the most fun kinds of challenges. Crypto challenge, you're often provided with an encoded message and some hint as to the encoding technique, right? So particularly for the simple challenges, you have the message that's encoded in a certain way, and what you have to do is figure out what the encoding is. It might be a rotational cipher. It might be a base64 encoding. It may be, there's all kinds of different potential encoding techniques. And the idea is to figure out what the encoding is and then to decode it. So for those sort of simpler crypto challenges, websites like ASCII2hex.com are great because ASCII2hex.com will let you put in a bit of ASCII data and click submit, and you get the output in a whole bunch of different encoding techniques. And so the same in the reverse, right? If you put in data in one of these other encoding techniques and then click submit, then the ASCII text box is gonna give what it thinks the ASCII representation of that thing is. So if you have a bit of encoding and you just don't know what it is, you can go to the ASCII2hex website and you can just put that encoding in each one of the different boxes, click submit until one of them turns into ASCII text and you get an answer. And that will sometimes give you what you want. More advanced challenges will often be related to misconfigured or poorly secured encryption algorithms. And those are you know, that kind of a challenge is, you usually see those in CTFs that are geared towards college students or above, because you know, those are the students that would have seen some of these crypto techniques, or would have taken a class on cryptography, for example. But there are certainly challenges like that out there. Networking challenges. So the idea here is to analyze packet captures to find flags. Answer questions related to the network traffic, right? So there, you know, you might be asked to find the password in a blob of network traffic, and you have to be able to use tools to analyze the network traffic and turn it back into some useful information, right? And so, for example, if you have a packet capture of somebody connecting to an FTP site. It's not secure FTP. If it's just standard FTP, the way FTP works is it'll pass the username and password in the clear over the network, and if you have a packet capture, you can see that username and password. So that's kind of a good entry-level challenge that you'll see for students. Sometimes, you know, for entry-level CTFs for high school students, you'll just see something that says, you know, what's the IP address to MAC address mapping for this IP address, or what's the domain, you know, what's the DNS, what's the IP address for a particular, you know, domain name, kind of a thing. And you might be given a packet capture to try to find that kind of information. Some other networking challenges have you like carving an image or some other file out of a packet stream. So you might get some network transaction, and what you have to do is, you know, carve the file out of the packet stream, and there are techniques to do that using tools like Wireshark and others. Great tools for analyzing network packet captures are Wireshark is probably the most popular one these days. Graphical tool for analyzing network traffic. It's available for Windows, Linux, and Mac. Pretty popular, pretty powerful, feature-rich. It's not quite as efficient as other tools because it is, again, it's a GUI tool. So with any GUI tool, you have this overhead of all the graphics stuff, but it's pretty powerful and easy to use. If you're more of a command line expert, you might have better luck with something like TCP dump. So TCP dump is a command line tool that you can use in Unix or Linux to analyze packet captures, and if you know how to use it, it's very fast and efficient, and you can you know, search for different things, and it's you know, filter different data in it, and that's pretty powerful. And then WinDump is a Windows equivalent, not quite equivalent, but very similar to TCP dump, but it's used on the Windows command line. And then ngrep, network grep. So grep is a tool in Linux to search for strings in files, right? grep is a Linux tool used to search for strings in files. ngrep is used to search for strings in network traffic. And so if you have a network packet dump and you think that there's some particular string you're looking for, you can use ngrep to search for it, and that'll show you where in the packet capture that string is, and you know, you may have some reason to believe that the flag is near that particular string. So again, Wireshark, great tool for networking challenges, and we'll dig into that in later weeks. Web challenges are things that are related to websites, right? So, so easy challenges rely on basic understanding of HTML and how websites work. So, you know, the whole notion of having a web browser on a laptop and a web server and a student connecting over the network, looking at HTML pages and transferring data using the HTTP protocol. You know, you might have a challenge that expects the student to be able to look in the HTML and find the flag in the page source. You might have a challenge that has data somewhere hidden in the HTTP interaction. So easiest challenge rely on basic understanding of HTML and how websites work. More advanced challenges require some more advanced techniques, right? So they'll have some vulnerability. So you see lots of lots of web challenges that are PHP based, and PHP is a language that is used to craft interactive websites. Another language is JavaScript. These are two sort of popular languages that are used to automate web interactions. And so, you know, an advanced challenge might have some vulnerable PHP script or JavaScript application that can be abused in certain ways. Different ways you can abuse these. Some of these are like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, or command injection. And again, we'll dig deeper into some of these in future workshops. The tools that you use, if you use the Chrome web browser with the developer tools, you can see all of the you can see the cascading style sheets. You can see the HTML. You can see, you know, a bunch of information about, you know, you can see errors in the JavaScript, stuff like that. So you just using a browser in developer mode, you can see all kinds of different information about a web client's interaction with a web server. And then there's some more sophisticated tools you can use, web proxies, for example, like burp proxy, where you can intercept interactions between your web browser and the web server and manipulate data, and that can be helpful when you're solving one of these web challenges. And hopefully we'll take a look at some of that. Reverse engineering, again, most of these challenges are going to be, you'll see these like at the collegiate level. You'll have students who know assembly language programming. They understand how, you know, they understand computer architecture, and they can look at the control flow of a program and you know, maybe manipulate that control flow to get the flag out of a particular executable program. And this this image here is from a computer program called IDA Pro, and IDA stands for something. I don't remember what it stands for. But it's right now it's sort of the tool that's used for analysis of executable programs. You know, it's probably the best tool out there right now. There are some other tools that have grown up over the last couple of years that are kind of similar to IDA, but IDA's been around for many years and is very full-featured and widely used. There's a free version of IDA. So free means it's sort of like the crippled old version that students can use. That's what I had students use for years. The true IDA Pro, like if you get the latest version with all the bells and whistles, it can cost several $1,000s. So, you know, generally student teams don't have access to that, but students usually are able to get access to the free version, and the free version is pretty darn good. Other tools that you can use are things like DD at the Linux command line. It's a disassembler, or they can use GDB, the Linux command line debugger. This is a tool that programmers use. So if you have a college student who's been you know, writing programs for class, they're likely to be experienced with the GDB debugger, and there are ways in tools like GDB to control the execution flow of a program, for example, so you can make it do things that it wouldn't be able to do otherwise. Again, these are generally for more advanced CTFs, but sometimes you see some sort of low-level, entry-level reverse engineering challenges even in a high school CTF. Okay, and then forensics, this is where you are given some digital artifact. So here's the list of artifacts, right? Drive images, partial file systems, memory images, packet capture files. And you have to find some piece of information out of that digital artifact. So some tools that you use to do this kind of thing are things like Autopsy is a Linux tool for analyzing drive images. RegRipper is for analyzing Windows registry. So if you have a file system that has a Windows registry in it, then you can use RegRipper to find specific information in there. Volatility is a tool that you can use for memory forensics. So Believe it or not, these days we can get the memory image from a computer. So if a computer has been hacked and it's still running, then you can capture the memory, and then and you basically take the memory and write it to a file, and then you can use tools like volatility to analyze the memory image. Recall is another memory image forensics tool. And then a lot of forensics analysis is just using standard Linux search tools like find and grep and stuff like that to mine for data in some large file system. Okay, those are the challenge types. Talk lots more about them in the coming weeks. What I wanted to do quickly was talk about some good competitions at various levels and show you how to get access to some of this stuff right now. So some great high school competitions are listed here. Pico CTF is an annual CTF hosted by Carnegie Mellon. Yeah, it's hosted by Carnegie Mellon. So actually the guy who is running it nowadays is an acquaintance of mine, Martin Carlisle. He used to be faculty at the Air Force Academy. Now he's a faculty at Carnegie Mellon. And Pico CTF is a really cool, I don't know, I really like it. It's a collaboration between the Scilab at Carnegie Mellon and the video game program. And so it's sort of this combination video game CTF, and I'm going to show it to you in just a second. But you can get access to this now and use it and have your students use it. So it's a great way to practice for CTFs. HS CTF, high school CTF, the first CTF by high schoolers for high schoolers. This one you can get access to. There's no competition going on at HSCTF right now. I think they do like an annual thing, and I'm not sure the timeline of it, but they have old challenges posted that you can go look at, and I'll point you to that here in a minute. And then RU Secure CTF, this thing is open now, and you can go register students. Students can register a team, and they can play. Right now, there's practice rounds available, and then later, I think in later this month or in early March, there's a qualification round that'll be run in the RU Secure CTF. So that's an annual CTF that Radford University runs. And then the top teams go to Radford for the final sometime in April. So let me jump out here just for a second. Kind of running short on time here. So, so I went to Pico CTF. So if you Google Pico CTF 2018, you get here and you can register. So you can have your students register a team right now in Pico CTF. And so I'm logged in using my account, and I'm logged in as a teacher, so you can set up student accounts or teacher accounts. And you can set up classrooms. So here, I set up a classroom called Test Classroom. So you can have your students, I would encourage you, if you have any interest in having your students work on CTF challenges, it's a great activity for the classroom if you have some time at the end of the day, or if you have, you know, a time period where you're not quite sure what you're going to do, you can get them to start hacking on CTFs. You can set up classrooms, and then you can have the students register either independently or form teams, and then they can join your classroom. And with this, you can track their progress and you know, see how they're doing. So this is Pico CTF provides this functionality, which I think is pretty cool for teachers to track their students' progress. I'm going to click on the game link here, and the way this works is you have this little game screen. Again, this is a collaboration between their video game students at Carnegie Mellon and their cybersecurity students at Carnegie Mellon, and so you have this video game interface, and hopefully it'll load here. It's kind of slow. The first time you load it, it's kind of slow. They say it gets better. It says first loading of the game may be slow. Please be patient. Let it finish. Subsequent loadings will be faster. So I'll give it another few seconds to see if this thing will load. But you have a little avatar, and you have your avatar walk around. Okay, that's the music. Okay, so I started the game, but I really didn't do anything. And I'm going to click on my hideout. Now it has to load again. I'm getting music. I don't know if you're getting the music or not. Maybe not. So welcome to the IOSS headquarters. Before we can get ready for your first mission, we need to make sure that you're up to the task. it's unsafe to go outside. First thing you have to do is use one of the robots, is to fix the robot that we salvaged, right? So here I am. Oh, here's the robot. And so the first task is to, so, this part of it is a bit of computer gamey. So I put this things and then, okay, I fixed the robot. That's all good. Oh, enter your robot's name. Oh, where's my robot? Robots, okay. I guess I'm the robot now. And now I walk up. Okay, so here's the first challenge, right? This is my warm up. What is the base 16 of base 10, right? So what is OX3D in base 10? Okay, and so that's the first challenge. And what the student should do is figure out how to convert base 16 3D into base 10. And I don't know, there's probably lots of websites that'll do that for you. So that's CTFD, and it starts fairly simple and straightforward, and then it kind of ramps up over time. But pretty cool tool for you to use, and students can log in and use it now. Here's the next one I'm going to show you, HSCTF. So I just Googled HSCTF, a high school CTF, first CTF by high schools for high schoolers. Okay, it says HSCTF 5 is over. Doesn't provide much information about the next round, but down here at the bottom there's a practice. Find our practice problems here. So if you click here, what you get is a bunch of practice problems of some various categories, right? Crypto, algorithms, forensics, reverse engineering, and you can click on these challenges and solve them, right? So again, this is something that you get your students turned onto, and they could hack on some of these challenges. And then there's the RU Secure CTF. Again, students can log into this now, create teams, and practice. And here's the register button. So it says, sign up now, click register link at the top right and get started. You can start competing immediately after you register. So you register, you can start playing the practice round for RU CTF, and then if you go back to the web page, there's more information on the timeline. Again, this is gonna, okay, the final on campus is April 27th, 2019, and the online qualifying round starts on March 18th and goes to April 3rd. So that's something that your students can participate in. Okay, so those are CTFs that your students can do right now. I'm going to wrap up here. There's some collegiate and professional capture the flag competitions. Here's a list of them. I'm not going to talk about them, but you can freeze the video if you want and do some Googling of some of this stuff. And then finally, CTFtime.org is a website that provides information on past and upcoming capture the flag competitions. And CTF Time also provides write-ups for previous CTFs. So I'm going to pull up a tab. Well, I'll just go right here. CTFtime.org. Going to CTFtime.org. And it's going to pull up this dashboard of current, this is a current team rating of CTF teams. These are upcoming events. So there's STEM CTF Cyber Challenge 2019 coming up this weekend. TAMU CTF 19, this is Texas A&M. Looks like it's starting this weekend. Again, this is a high school CTF. USB ICTF. There's an archive of CTFs. There's write-ups, right? So if you go to archive and write-ups, you can go practice, for example, on Pico 2018 Pico CTF, and then you can dig through these write-ups and you can find write-ups for those challenges. So when your students say, hey, we tried this, we couldn't figure out how to make it work, you can work with them on CTF Time to find the write-up and help them solve the challenge. So pretty cool stuff. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thanks everyone for participating or for listening to this CTF intro after the fact, and I look forward to spending the next few weeks digging into different kinds of CTF challenges. So thanks.